There is even more news brewing overseas from Syrian forces gaining ground as they advance toward Aleppo to this week's planned summit between North and South Korea. Arise News Foreign Affairs contributor Brian Plowman is here to help us put this all into perspective. Brian, as always, it's good to see you. So let's start off with maybe what can be considered the non-news, and that was the summit between President Obama and China's President Xi Jinping. What happened, and why didn't it happen?
I think we can say that things happened. There was a lot of political theater, obviously, in the shirt sleeves summit. But there was some common ground, I think, found or revealed. A lot of things happened before they actually start strolling around the grounds and, smiling. In this case, North Korea was very high up on the agenda, and I think it was agreed, or there was a connection in that North Korea should not be a nuclear power. I think both sides are sort of firm on that. And that both sides, North Korea and South Korea, should come to the table. Now, if we look at what happened this weekend, North Korea and South Korea, at a very low level, came to the table. More talks are planned on Wednesday. Now, I don't necessarily know whether China and U.S. put the screws on North Korea and South Korea to come to the table now, but there's probably some connection there. Another kind of less sexy development, both sides, President Xi and President Obama, agreeing that something has to be done about hydrofluorocarbons. So they've agreed to work with other countries to reduce hydrofluorocarbons, the refrigerants that go into air conditioners and refrigerators. So again, it's not so sexy, but climate change is a pretty huge thing affecting us all.
Okay, all right. Well, let's move on then to this big story about Edward Snowden, who released information, leaked classified information about the NSA surveillance program. And of course, there's a lot of debate and talk about security and privacy here in the U.S., but there is an international angle. Sort of parse through that for us.
I think we can talk about the here and now. So Snowden has revealed a whole lot of stuff, talking about how a tremendous amount of information is just kind of sucked up. Now, we have to remember that these heavy-duty intelligence programs, at least this wave started right after 9/11 because of the Patriot Act. The focus was terrorism here and abroad. It's turned into a kind of a vacuuming. Now, one can say, well, when you're doing that with your foreign, with people in foreign countries, that's less of a concern. And he pointed out, and he released documents to the effect that billions of pieces of information are being collected on our adversaries, so countries like Iran and Pakistan kind of straddles both lines of adversary and I wouldn't call it ally, but sometime partner. So 14 billion pieces of information collected from Iran in the month of March alone, and 13.5 billion from Pakistan, but also from our allies in Jordan. So that, I think, causes some concern. But then he also released a document, not getting talked about that much, called Presidential Policy Directive 20, in which President Obama basically outlines the conditions under which the U.S. can launch cyber warfare on other countries. So non-consensual cyber warfare in different countries. So it sort of took away some leverage that he might have had on President Xi Jinping of China when he's sort of getting on the Chinese side about all their cyber hacking, when in fact he's just laid down the policy of cyber hacking for the U.S.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I wonder how this might impact, it just occurs to me as you're talking, how this might impact the U.S.-China relationships. There's a report, Snowden is in Hong Kong, very close to the China border, and there's a report that he might try to go to Beijing and seek asylum there. How might that affect diplomacy between the two countries?
I don't think that's going to happen. Hong Kong and the U.S. have an extradition treaty, went into effect in 1998. China can overrule that, but for China, I mean, it would be a strategic snafu, blunder, imbroglio of astronomical proportions for China to get involved or for Snowden to, I mean, there's no way he could get across the border anyway. But before, I was talking about the here and now. I think it's also important to remember the historical perspective on the NSA revelations. These programs, like other programs, were started to monitor foreign threats and internal threats that were terrorist-related threats, or back in the day, communists. But we should remember what the Church Committee told us. That committee, Senate Committee to investigate, on the one hand, what foreign intelligence or U.S. intelligence agencies were doing abroad in terms of ordering assassinations and things like that, and what they were doing domestically. So in 1977, Christopher Pyle, an Army captain, had to speak out, 1970, saying that military intelligence, he was working for Army military intelligence, they were collecting information on domestic groups not involved in any national security threat. So you're talking about the NAACP, the ACLU. And I think it's important to remember what the Church Committee said about his whistleblowing. And the whistleblowing, they said, the committee is aware that public exposure can jeopardize legitimate, productive, and costly intelligence programs. We do not condone the extra-legal activities which led to the exposure of some questionable operations. But they say, nevertheless, 2 points emerge from an examination of the termination of numerous domestic intelligence activities. 1, major illegal or improper operations thrived in an atmosphere of secrecy and inadequate executive control. And 2, public airing proved to be the most effective means of terminating or reforming these operations. So I think from both a domestic and an international perspective, it's important to keep this in mind. We have a number of issues, one of which is oversight by Congress and the Senate, and the role of an independent press, and also the historical role of whistleblowers. Snowden knows what he's in for. The world is going to come down on him. The U.S. is going to come down on him. We have to look at the effects of what's going to happen now.
And you make a very interesting point. We were talking about this morning in preparation for the show. Is does he really know what he's done? Because the life that he once knew is over, never to go back to.
He's a 29-year-old man, experience in the CIA, worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, one of the top consultancies in the world, worked for the NSA, and as you saw in the clip that you played, he had the ability with a couple of keystrokes to pretty much monitor anyone in the world, even the president, if he had a personal email. I would think that intellectually he probably has a pretty good idea of what has happened if he, at 29 years old, can track anyone else in the world. One of the interesting things that he did say was that he checked this information very carefully to determine that he would not be jeopardizing individuals. He was releasing information about systems. That was his goal. So I'd imagine that if he has that level of sophistication that some recent leakers have not necessarily had, he may have some intellectual idea of what is in store for him, but I don't think you can anticipate all the folks who are going to come after you and how your life is going to be completely transformed.
Yeah. This is going to be one thing that's interesting to watch as it unfolds. Let's just talk about a couple of hot spots in both Northern Africa and the Middle East. Let's start, first of all, we've already reported that 7 Taliban fighters attacked the facility at the airport in... where was it? In Libya.
Kabul.
In Kabul, in Afghanistan. This is the question I have for you. Is this a direct result of the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan that the Taliban now is reasserting itself?
I think that the Taliban is a guerrilla force that does things depending upon what their adversaries do. So they ebb and they flow. I was in Kabul in 2002, and one could say it was actually safer than it is now. I said this on the show before, and there's a saying attributed to Mullah Omar: you have the clocks, but we have the time, meaning that they are skilled, expert at waiting out. So the fact that they were actually able to launch this attack on the military airport, now granted, they didn't reach their objective. 2 hangars were destroyed. But both NATO and the Afghan side saying that NATO troops were involved. Everybody says the Afghan troops were in the lead, but oftentimes when you wait a little bit, you find out how crucial the role of the foreign forces were. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but that would be something to look for.
All right, and finally, let's talk about what, the ever-growing conflict in Syria. Not only is it continuing to spill over into other borders, there was a killing of a protester in Beirut. Also, it seems the Assad regime has taken back Qusayr. Just give us sort of an update and what we should be watching now.
Well, I think generally speaking, what we've been hearing about, or what I've been hearing about, in two strands. U.S. once again considering whether to arm the rebels, a big step to take. And on the other hand, reports of foreign fighters streaming into the country to fight against Hezbollah. Again, I mean, a really volatile situation with so many different players involved. Israel saying, well, we're not really involved. Well, actually, if you bomb Damascus, you're involved. So I think that this, again, bears watching because so many of the different powers in the region are involved.
Indeed. Well, I know we'll continue to talk about that. Brian Palmer, thank you so much. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Happy Monday.